So hello everybody and welcome to this GLEON event hosted by the GLEON Student Association. Today we will have a panel discussion about publishing in journals chaired by Lisette with a really terrific panelist that I'm very looking forward to hear all the nice conversations. I'll just give a brief introduction to the GSA first. So the GSA is currently chaired by Abdu, with co-chaired by Rosie and Jenna. And we also have advisory capacity in the form of Catherine O'Reilly. And the whole purpose of the GSA is for the students, by the students. We also have several different committees that do several different kinds of work. For example, the workshop committee, they're hosting several different events, such as this one. And that consists of these nice, fine people here. Prior to GLEON this year, we hosted the Linear series where you can find different lectures and workshops and topics such as physical, hydrodynamics and limnology, and ecosystem modeling, for example. So go and check that out on the GLEON website. We also have the workshops for this GLEON, and we are the last one in this round. So now there is not much to further say about, although I have to remind you that this workshop is recorded, so you'll be able to go back and hear this presentation and the conversation again. Also, we have a channel under the Slack page for GLEON, so you can have the opportunity to continue the conversation after this workshop. I will post the link in the chat. And then, without further ado, I will present our chair for this panel discussion, Dr. Lisette de Senerpont Domis. She's an aquatic ecologist at the Netherlands Institute for Ecology, also holds a PhD from the Natural Sciences of Leiden University, and has many different interests, such as how different components of human-induced global changes affect our water and our relation to water. For example, this includes, for example, climate warming, eutrophication, and habitat fragmentation. As of 2011, Lisette is also leading the Aquatic Knowledge Center at Wageningen that translates state-of-the-art fundamental scientific knowledge to encompass solutions for complex water-related problems. Lisette also has supervised many PhDs and postdocs and is a reviewer for many journals. So the perfect candidate to lead us through this discussion. So now, without further ado, I will give the microphone to you, Lisette. Thank you for being here today and help us through this discussion.
So thank you, Tobias, and thank you for the lovely introduction. I'm also the co-chair, the current co-chair of GLEON. So maybe some of you might know me in that capacity as well. I would first like to ask the panelists to introduce themselves with a few short lines, and also in the context of publishing. And then I would like to walk us through the questions you guys raised. And please remember, you can also use the chat to raise questions or the raise hand function. So I would like to start with, so today we have three seasoned editors, and we have two people that present the early career perspective. And I would like to start with the early career perspective. So Nuria, could you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. It's nice to meet you all. So I'm Nuria Catalan. I'm at present a Marie Sklodowska-Curie Fellow at the LSE CNRS in Paris. I work in carbon biogeochemistry in diverse aquatic ecosystems. Well, so my experience with publishing is like mostly related to academic journals. You can imagine right now I'm 8 years after my PhD defense. So just to give an idea of my career Yeah, and lately I got my first experience as an editor of a special issue as well. So that's a bit, yeah.
Facundo, could you introduce yourself?
Yes, hi everybody, nice to meet you. I'm Facundo Scordo. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Nevada, Reno. The last couple of years I've been studying lake metabolism with a special focus on how wildfire smoke affect lake metabolism in nearshore and offshore processes. And related, similar to Nuria, my related with publication, mostly related with writing papers, submitting paper, and also I've been a reviewer for a couple of manuscripts, but I've never been an editor of a journal.
And then maybe Pat Soranno, could you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Pat Soranno. I'm a freshwater ecologist at Michigan State University. And I had the great pleasure of founding one of ASLO's journals, Limnology and Oceanography Letters. It was ASLO's first open access journal, and it was really exciting creating a journal kind of from scratch and thinking about the ways that we do things and what flexibilities I had to do things differently to, in particular, to promote a more equitable publishing process. And also one of the things we really cared about was including early career scientists, much like GLEON does. And so we developed a early career scientist fellow program called the Railing Coal Fellowship. And what we've learned from that program is that early career researchers have a lot to bring to editors and publishing, not just in submitting manuscripts, but being very strategic about how journals and publishers should operate. Thank you, and I'm very happy to be here.
And then Kathy Cottingham, please.
Yep. Hi, I'm Kathy Cottingham, and I am also a freshwater ecologist. I'm at Dartmouth College in New Hampshire, and I am at a very different sort of spectrum than Pat. So in January 2020, I took over as editor-in-chief at the Ecological Society of America journal Ecology, which had been edited by the same person for the last, I think, somewhere between 18 and 20 years, and had just published volume 100 when I took over. So as compared to starting a journal from scratch, I'm trying to figure out how to innovate something that has a tremendous amount of inertia. And so I think we'll provide an interesting complementarity, and then Juan will be in a more similar boat to me. I'm just looking forward to having the conversation. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And Juan Corley, could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hello, good morning to everybody. My name is Juan Corley, and I have nothing to do with lakes. I work with insects, but I'm here in the capacity of, I'm the editor-in-chief of Ecological Applications that sees an interesting number of aquatic ecology papers, applied ecology. As Kathy mentioned, I inherited the journal, which was handled by the same editor for ages. Eons, I should say. And I was an editor of another journal before this. And one of the things that I'm worried about, or I'd like to make the journal thrive, is in becoming a more diverse journal, not only in the content, but also in the kind of, people who are publishing, and also making it more international. By the way, I'm not from the US. I'm based in southern Argentina, in Bariloche. Some of you probably heard about it because there are many lakes here, and there's a lot of lake ecology going around. So I'm interested in also making the journal really international. So I'm really happy to be here and share the conversation. Thank you.
So thank you all. There's the GSA has asked the audience to prepare questions through a questionnaire, and they were considering 3 parts of sort of the research article trajectory, including preparing your manuscript, submitting your manuscript, and then post-submitting, so responding to reviewers, article acceptance, promoting your work, for instance. And I just like to remind you that you can also post questions still through the chat and also just by raising your hands. But if I don't see any raised hands, I'll start with some of the few first questions. And I would like just the panelists to jump in where they feel comfortable in answering the question. And I think some of what we talked about when you guys were introducing yourselves is about diversity and inclusiveness. And maybe this first question arises from that issue, and that is a question about what are good ways to prepare your manuscript for double-blind peer review. And the person answering that should maybe also explain to the bigger audience what double-blind peer review is. Does anybody of the panelists feel comfortable answering that question? No.
I can say something if you want.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, double blind, the idea is that reviewers don't know who the authors are, and the authors, of course, don't know who the reviewers are. So the idea is that, you know, there is no bias in the review process because you don't know who the authors are. And as I said, reviewers, of course, you don't know who they are. It's an interesting idea, and many journals have it. We don't use it, and I don't know, ecology, you don't do that. Kathy, do you? You don't do that. But anyway, we don't do it, and I personally have some mixed feelings in terms of how it works, because in those who do ecology, we're very much, you know, attached to a field site or study site, a study model, and so it takes, you know, putting 2 and 2 together and figuring out who the author is. If the paper comes from, you know, Bariloche, Argentina, and Lake Nahuel Huapi. So in a way, you imagine there is no bias, but it can happen anyway. That's, I guess, I mean, it's not totally, completely sorted out, in my opinion. So that's why I have mixed feelings, but it is a good idea in theory, at least.
Yeah, and so I'm also an editor at Wiley, and I struggle in how to make this indeed operational, I think. And that's maybe more journals are struggling with that. And there, for the audience out there, there's different types of reviewing systems out there. You have the more traditional journals that do blind peer review, where the reviewer editor sees who the authors are submitting the paper. But you have also something which is called continuous review, and that these are the frontiers journals. So there's different systems out there with their pros and cons. Facundo, you would like to share something?
Sorry, I was mute. Yeah, I was having this thought for a couple of years about how, if it is truly useful, the blind review, right?
You need to unmute yourself, Facundo.
Sorry. I was saying that I've been having this thought for a couple of years, if it would not be more honest, that the blind review process does not exist, that the review process is with names, and we have an honest conversation between the reviewer and the writer about what's good and what's bad in the manuscript and how to improve the manuscript. I really don't get the whole point of the blind review process in general. Well, we should be able to have like an honest conversation about the content of the manuscript and how to improve forward. But that's just a personal thought.
So Kathy, go ahead.
I love that ideal. And yet the practicality is that if you're an early career researcher and you are sent a paper from, say, someone senior to me who has a incredible stature in the field, how many early career researchers are comfortable taking on, you know, some of the lions in our field? So this is a sticky one for me. I actually want to know who the authors are because I do backflips for early career researchers. And if I don't know that they're early career researchers, I mean, when I see new papers that are on the bubble, I'm on Google looking for these people to figure out if they're early career, and if they're early career, they get the benefit of the doubt. So I love the ideal, and I don't know what the answer is. I just wanted to share those 2 points.
No, I have the same feeling. I remember when I just started as a reviewer, I would really get intimidated by big names as well, right? And feel like I wouldn't be able to speak my mind or reject a paper by big names. And I got quickly over myself, but I think this protective shield you have as an early career researcher, that you're blind, might be comfortable for some people new to the reviewing scheme. So there's other questions as well about preparing your manuscript, and I don't really see questions in the chat popping up, so I'll just continue. And I think this is an important one for the first timers out there, and that is, what are the best practices to prepare a manuscript for the first time? Is any of the panelists willing to take that first question up? I see a lot of smiley faces. It's too big of a question to answer.
It's a difficult question, I think. That's why we're all being really shy. I don't know if I am the students in my lab, my first approach is they usually, I mean, first thing to consider is that all my students are not English native speakers, right? So that's the first hurdle. And so a good starting point is actually to, that's what I recommend, to read the literature and maybe do some copy paste at some stage, you know, fix it. This paragraph is a good paragraph, I like it, this is a good idea. And then work as from there. And then of course follow, you know, writing guides. They're really excellent books and you know, out there that you can actually use to organize your writing skills. But I don't know, there's a lot of creativity there as well.
Facundo, you would like to say something as well.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Juan said. I'm also not a non-native speaker, but I guess like that's what I do. If I feel stuck or I didn't know how to start, I will start with the method. That is easy in the paper, and at least you have something write down and it's encouraged for you, and you have a section done. And the other thing is that you can start with topic sentences for the introduction or your discussion, so you don't have to write the whole introduction or the whole discussion at once. You can start with just throwing some topic center that you want to discuss, and then you can develop from there. And the results should be something easy to write too, right? Method and results should be the most easy. And then, yeah, introduction and discussion, the more hard ones.
Oh, Pat, do you like to add to that?
Yeah, all I would add, perhaps the most important advice I give to my students and the people that I work with is to first decide what your take-home message is. And you should have 1 to 3 of those. If you have more than 3, then you might have too many. And that may help you figure out whether you have more than one paper that you're trying to squeeze into. And I have found that students in particular are most resistant to that one piece of advice, is what is your take-home message? It's the hardest thing to figure out, and you need to figure out before you start writing. So to me, and then to actually figure out the mechanics, I use the Schimmel book, which I realize I should have the title. Kathy, you probably have the title at your fingertips. And that's the best book that I've read to actually the mechanics of writing an article.
So, Kathy, maybe you would like to add. At this point, I don't know, no longer see if people just raise their hand or not forgot to unraise their hand. So, but maybe Kathy can contribute.
The other thing, the way that I figure out the take-home message to play off where Pat left off is for me, it's crafting the figures and the tables. And to be able to bring the figures and tables to a whiteboard or to put them up on a screen and tell people my story. And in our lab, we kind of have a rule, try to give the talk or the poster before you start writing the paper, because you basically wordsmith it. And the thing that can really help for the non-native speakers is talk it out and have some sort of voice recording software on. And you can actually get a pretty good, decent first draft talking it out that you can then edit. But for me, it's all about those figures and tables and what message they tell.
Nuria.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Cassie just said. So when I was a PhD student, my main advisor recommended me to do like a one-page summary. So just, you know, the first line would be like, what will be my introduction about, like the general, then to put a lot of effort in the hypothesis, and then to do a table with the tables and figures and was planning. Second column, which message this figure was going to convey. And third, which of those hypotheses it was going to contribute to answer. And I started doing this during my PhD, and I follow doing this. And whenever a student I have, I recommend, because I think it's really helpful. And related with one question in the chat, I usually do this before choosing a journal, but I don't know if this is the best way to do it. This is how I do it.
So Juan, do you would like to add to this answer, or did you not?
Yes,
yeah,
very briefly. I thought also I was reminding myself of how we work, and we also use a whiteboard, and it's really helpful to plan an outline of your paper. No, these are going to be, this is going to be what introduction, I mean, sort of a geographical spatial idea. This is what the introduction is going to look like. No, these are the paragraphs, and I need a paragraph that needs to say this, and I need a paragraph that develops this idea. Maybe start with this outline, writing on this whiteboard, you know, paragraph 1, paragraph 2, and then maybe the order changes, right? But the general idea, this is, I need to say this. I need to introduce my, you know, question here. I need to introduce my system here, or whatever. That's another thing we do, but that also depends on the relationship supervisor-student, right? How much time the supervisor wants to spend with the student. And finally, just to wrap up, there's also another book by Stephen Hurd that I put on the chat box, which is really good, sorry. And then there's a new version 2021. It's really excellent, very helpful, very easy to read, and with also tips of how to organize your workday.
Thanks for that. And I'm trying to, yeah, so I do that thing that Juan also mentioned. I usually make a skeleton with my PhDs, and I think it's also good to revise that skeleton once in a while. And I sometimes say to my students, it's so the introduction, so an article is almost like a circle. If you don't circle back to your introduction, you have an issue there. And if you, for instance, if you're introducing new terms in your hypothesis that you haven't introduced before, you need to circle back to the rest of your introduction. So I like to think in terms of circle, in terms of the structure. And I'm also not a native speaker of people, but it's much harder to, so I often feel that the pitfall of native, of people that do not speak English as their first language is that we want to make the most beautiful sentence out there, right? But it's much harder to fix the structure as a supervisor than to fix language. So don't be overwhelmed with language, but first try to find a good structure for your paper. That's my humble advice there. And Nuria has her hand raised.
Yeah, just about this, I'm not a native speaker neither. So what I do is, like, in the very first draft, I drop in sentences in Spanish if I need, whatever that doesn't stop my flow of thinking. And then I can translate and so on.
So we have a question in the chat as well by Kate Reinold. Kate, do you want to say it verbally or do you want me to read it up? The choice is yours.
I'll add a human dimension to this. Oh shoot, I forgot I had my camera covered. So I've done this both ways. I've published like a couple of papers and I've done this both ways. I'm still very new to the whole process. Where some people recommend choosing the journal before you even begin writing the paper. And some people recommend writing your paper and then when you're getting close to the end, finding a journal that's a good fit. And maybe it depends on the type of paper you're writing or whatever, or maybe there's some other method. But I was just kind of curious to hear what the panelists thought about those different methods of identifying a journal and where in the writing process you do that.
Well, I think sometimes it's very easy, right? In terms of you have this idea and you know, this is perfect for this journal. And that sort of goes straightforward. But I think that generally what happened, this is my limited experience in this, is that it's an evolving process. You start writing and then you see, oh, maybe I should take it in this direction or this other direction. And so, and you go thinking journals at the same time you're writing. I don't know if you have the target. I mean, if it is a clear, you know, two-step stage thing, it's like, you know, an ongoing parallel process. But that's my take.
So we have Kathy first.
So I don't know that I recommend picking exact journals, but I do think it helps to have at least your rough audience in mind. So for me, it's a lot different to write a paper for limnology and oceanography or freshwater biology than it is to write a paper for ecology or applications. So at least deciding whether you're aiming for a general audience or an aquatics audience is a really key step early on. But you may tinker further down. So it's obviously an iterative process. But for me, I need to know at least a little bit about my audience to really write my intro.
I would just second, that's exactly what I was going to say, Kathy. And I remember writing the author guidelines for L&O letters. And there in the guidelines, we really emphasized our audience. So sometimes journals will emphasize the audience. And I encourage you to read the author guidelines carefully when they do. So for letters, we were trying to have a very broad audience. And that really determines how you write the paper. You do not assume everyone knows what an epilimnion is. So that means you have to define that term, but you can assume everyone knows what oxygen is, right? So I completely agree that having a clear view of your audience and worry about figuring out, okay, which journal matches this audience, you likely will have a couple options once you're further into the paper. So I completely agree with the iterative nature, but know your audience before you start writing.
Yeah, so know.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that there's also this route where you submit your paper and it gets rejected, right? And then you submit it again and it gets rejected. So there is flexibility in terms of, I agree with identifying your audience, but I mean, there is a message you want to convey, right? And you probably have to change things as you go developing your paper. If you submit it to application, it gets rejected, and then you submit it to you know, ecological entomology or whatever, you're probably going to have to readapt that. So keep an open mind.
Yeah, and I think in general, it's good to know your audience, whether you're speaking for it or writing for it, right? It's also a courtesy, I think, you do to your audience. There's questions in the chat as well. Rafa Marseille, do you want to ask the question yourself?
Well, it's fine. It's just something that I'm thinking always when writing papers, because I'm a non-native speaker.
You may want to speak up, Rafa, because you're hard to hear.
Okay. So the point is that non-native speakers, we used to borrow sentences, right? Because you lack the language. And my question is that plagiarism? So it's going to be detected by those automatic softwares as plagiarism? And what do you think about it as editors? Thank you, Lisette.
So for the audience out there, so usually publishers have some kind of automated step in there where they check for plagiarism. And if it surpasses a certain threshold, then it's flagged automatically. And this is something the editors will see as well, not the reviewers, but the editors will see this. So just for information, it's typically not Turnitin, because Turnitin is more catering to the audience of students. It's a different type of software. But panelists, feel free to step in what you think of this issue.
I'll just start. And again, I mean, I completely understand. English is my native language, so I have it much easier. However, regardless, this counts as plagiarism. And so I would recommend against this practice, because when you're writing a paper and cutting and pasting, you can quickly forget which sentence you borrowed and which you didn't. But I really was struck by Nuria's suggestion of what she does is write in her native language if she can't figure out how to do it in English. I'd never heard that strategy before, and it's brilliant. I love that. So I would encourage that strategy over copying an English sentence that you like from another paper. And that's just my gut. And I'm curious if Kathy and Juan, if you agree, you know, in your roles as editors right now.
Kathy?
I think I would tend to lean towards Pat and to try to avoid it. Definitely, you know, I am so old that when I wrote my first paper in high school, I took notes on note cards and you sorted out the note cards, right? And so there was always a special way you took notes from your paper versus someone else's paper. So I guess, you know, if you absolutely want to borrow a sentence, put quotes around it and stick a comment and say where you got it from, right? So if you really need that as a placeholder, stick the quotes in there, know where you got it, fix it later. But I would echo Pat in praising Nuria's suggestion. I thought it was brilliant too. Juan, obviously you fit in this seat more than Pat and me though, so.
Yeah, I'm less convinced actually, because I mean, of course, definitely plagiarism is something we don't want to see, right? But for example, when we're working with, I don't know, work with wasps, Vespula invasive wasps in Patagonia. And there are like, you know, hundreds of papers talking about wasps. And then I get the student writing the method section and he has to describe the wasp biology. So I suggest, you know, cut and paste, and then we edit that, because you're not going to invent anything new. I mean, we know wasps lay so many eggs, they have, you know, so many legs, they're this color. So that can be very helpful. I mean, you'll have to edit it. You write it in your own words, but it is a starting guide. And I don't do what Nuria does, actually. And I don't recommend my students to do that, to write in Spanish, because then they drive me mad trying to translate the Spanish into English. But that's my experience. Sorry, I don't want to discourage you, because, you know, Spanish is very different. The construction of the sentence is different. So then they write this same idea in English with the verb in the wrong place, and, you know, sentences which are, you know, paragraph long and things like that. But anyway, that's I suggest my students try to write in English. You'll have to write in English at some point. Anyway, different strategies. This is interesting. This is fun, actually.
Yeah, and I think the perspective from people that do not use English as their first language is a bit different on this matter. So I'm also interested to hear what Facundo and Cui as a audience first. But perhaps Cui, do you want to add to this question, or do you want to raise a different question?
Okay, so I agree with, it's kind of like, as a non-English speaker or writer, it's kind of like writing in your native language thinking and writing in English thinking may be a huge challenge. So I kind of like agree with Juan that that's the skill definitely need to developing for if I want to pursue my academia, need to like writing as an English thinking writer. So anyway, so my question here is like, would you guys saying like over-citing is much more better than not like citing, regardless of this plagiarism issue? Because when I took my comms, I kind of have this issue struggling about this issue too. So I'm kind of right now is like oversighting everything, just make sure, okay, I remember where I got the sentence from or where I got that from. So it could be kind of like noising, but yeah, I just still want to know the panel's opinion about this. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, so just that I understand you clearly, you think oversighting is when you is what you call oversighting is that when you literally use a sentence and then put a citation behind it, or that you for every sentence you have in your paper you put a citation behind it? Just that I understand it clearly, and the audience maybe as well.
Okay, so for example, like wetlands is very important ecosystem in the like carbon cycling in processing or like functioning. So I need cite some paper about something like that. Okay, I may, sorry, my mind is kind of like, it's just too much going on and in here. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so
I guess the question is how many citations should a paper have? No, I guess that's your question.
And is there a thing as oversighting?
So how about the definition of like wetlands? Like, do I need to cite that wetlands?
Okay, I get you. Or you say, okay,
or what is evolutionary? Like, do I need to cite? Okay, the definition what I got evolutionary is, or like species. I mean, in different levels, like there are maybe like more than 20 definition about what is species, right? So I'm kind of like, okay. So
that's okay. I get your point.
Okay, thank you.
No worries. No, and it's a bit different from plagiarism, I think. But so I don't know if there's still people that want to respond to the plagiarism issue, or maybe want to respond to Kui here. Go ahead. Facundo, you had your hand raised for a while.
Yeah, sorry, I was thinking of the previous question before one. So I kind of agree with some of the thing that Juan says about the methodology. Like recently, I have been writing several papers about like metabolism, and when I have to explain my metabolism model over and over, well, I've explained it once in English. If I have to find different words to explain the same in English, it's like, oh gosh, it's so difficult, that aspect. But still, I have one of my co-authors say, well, you should not put like kind of what Pat and Katie said, like you should not copy and paste parts of your previous methodology, which was so difficult, and I'm still struggling with that. And I don't think it like changing my methodology and explaining my model in a different way will do anything about the content of my papers and my idea. There is where I struggle a little bit with that fact in the methodology. Is kind of wow. But then, well, in the other side, I have to admit that I do the same as Nuria. Once I'm writing in English, but I cannot figure out how to keep writing in English, I will put my ideas in Spanish, and then I will figure out how I can translate that. But I don't want to stop my flow of ideas when I start like that's going on.
Yeah, and I think another thing might be actually, don't worry about writing bad English in your first draft. Just write bad English. Do it. Because that's another I see it a lot with my PhDs, and some of them are in the audience, that they stop submitting a paper or sending me a draft because they think the English is poor. But what will your supervisor do? They won't give you a punishment for it. So don't stop that creative flow. I think that's an important thing. And if writing in Spanish helps your creative flow, maybe you should. But then you might see a very heavy editing phase, because I do think the grammar might be a bit different in Spanish versus English. Pat, you had your hand raised.
Well, I don't want to belabor the point, but I would say this problems with methods is for English speakers as well as non-English speakers. And I was I think 15 years into my career before I realized that actually cutting and pasting sections of your methods counts as plagiarism, particularly when you think about, a previous journal, and the intellectual properties and copyright. So it is kind of ridiculous. One little way to help that is you could say, as described in Scordo et al. In 2017, our methods were, and I don't think you have to use quotes, but you have just attributed the whole paragraph. So anyways, I think we have used that strategy in our research group. We have the same problem. We use the same database for all of our research, and we have the same problem to explain it in our methods.
So I don't think we should forget Kui's question, which was a different question altogether, right? It was about oversighting. Is there a thing like oversightation in papers? Do we need to explain, for instance, climate change the whole time? Do we need to define that and have a citation behind that? So this is a question for the panel.
This might get back to the knowing your audience, right? So if you have a target audience in mind, you know what they know and what they don't know, at least to some extent. So I think there are certain things that if you're writing for limnology and oceanography, you don't need to define or to say or to talk about. And there are other things for that audience that you would need to talk about. So the issue of oversightation, the place where you run into that is in journals like mine, where we have a page length. We don't really want half the paper to be references and half the paper to be text. And so there is a fine line there. Your reviewers will help you find it, but there's often a point at which it's too many. I mean, there's journals, I think, Pat, correct me if I'm wrong, but doesn't L&O letters have a citation count that you need to fall within? So you do need to be paying attention to that piece too.
Yeah, so that was an issue. I will say that's an issue I pushed back from the board with. They wanted our papers to be short and sweet and to the point, which I agree with. And so they put a limit, or encouraged me to put a limit on the citations. But then I found that people were not citing the full rich literature that they should, and that they were only citing the really big names that people were looking for. So I was able to convince them to relax that citation, but I completely agree with Kathy. As a reader, I don't like just reading a paragraph that has, 50 citations in it. It makes the readability of the paper go down. But at the same time, to me, it's a bit of an equity issue that I want to make sure we are representing the full literature that's out there and not just the really big, well-known names.
I would add to that it also has to do with the writing process. I mean, if you want to discuss, the ecology of an invasive species, you don't write a full paragraph defining invasion ecology, full of citations from Simberloff or whoever, right? So, I mean, I guess part of the discussion we're having here, and again, I find it really interesting, has to do with conveying a message, right? You've done your research, and this is part of the research process, right? I've done my experiment, I analyzed my data, and then I have to share with the scientific community, with the society in general, right? So, and this takes me, because we're discussing, citations, we're discussing paper length, we're discussing, plagiarism, And I'm thinking that the whole landscape of publication is also evolving in a direction which is, you know, I don't know where it's going, to be honest, but it's going in evolving very rapidly, and we're seeing things that we were taught to do in a given way. And I mean, I guess Kathy and Pat agree with me. Our supervisors took hours editing our citation, saying this is the wrong format. You know, first name, then year, and now that's, you know, nonsense, because you can submit it. Most journals are format free, and so that's not really a big deal. So I think that evolution also will make, you know, big changes. And again, I go back to the idea of conveying your message. And just one thing for clarification for Nuria and Facundo. I'm not suggesting, I also use Spanish in my text, but I use it to write ideas, right? So I have to write about, you know, this. So then I write it down in Spanish. But what I don't do is write the sentence, you know, like if I'm writing, writing a full paper in Spanish, because we have journals in Spanish, right? I don't think about the grammar and the sentence construction or the paragraph. I just write the idea, and then I try to write it in English. But anyway.
So I also think we should leave time for the other categories that people were asking questions about. And important things that keep on coming back in the category submitting your manuscript is the importance of the cover letter. How important is writing this cover letter for you guys, editors?
I'll start with this one. So I was, again, I had the pleasure and the luxury of launching a journal, and I said, absolutely no cover letters. One, I really dislike writing cover letters. I can't stand it. As an author, I'm like, I crafted this paper beautifully. I have explained what's in it. Why do you want me to then explain it again? So I was a little selfish in that regard. Second, what I realized is that cover letters were being used inconsistently in the review process. And so that, to me, as far as standardizing peer review, that made no sense. And then it was unclear, is the cover letter available only to the editor-in-chief but not the associate editor? And then third, it seemed to me, it came back to equity, that, you know, more experienced scientists are going to know how to craft that beautiful cover letter that says, you will be crazy not to you know, sorry, not fund to publish this paper. And so that didn't seem fair. And I was interested in streamlining the whole process. So I said cover letters are not only, you don't have to submit them, they're not allowed. And what I found is authors still submitted them, and then I would try to delete them from the process so that they would not be influenced. So Kathy and Juan, I don't know if you've tackled this in your journals, but it made me so happy to not have to deal with cover letters.
Juan and I have seen each other talk about this one before. So ecology has cover letters. They are looked at rarely and mostly in fields that are far from my own, where I might have trouble putting work into context. So my personal take is that the paper makes the pitch, and for the most part, I'm making my call from the paper. And every once in a while, I feel the need to go and look. The reason ecology still has cover letters is that is the opportunity for the authors to make their pitch for why their paper is longer than the length limits. So I still needed to keep something about why they needed the length. I am currently toying with tossing that entirely, following your bold lead, Pat. But functionally, cover letters are not playing a large role for me. And Juan, I can't actually remember your answer on this one.
No, I agree. I mean, I use them occasionally, but there's no pattern. And I think if we could, you know, not have them, it wouldn't make a big change. I always have to read the paper anyway. So,
I mean, from an author standpoint, they take a lot of time to craft. And so it would save authors a lot of time to say no. And Kathy, you can certainly have a comment box that says, if you've exceeded the limit, put your, you know, 200-word explanation here. I don't know. I was impressed with Scholar One, which I think you all use. There's lots of different options you can do in that regard. Anyway, sorry, I'm on a soapbox, I realize.
Yeah, and
well, it's interesting. It's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and we're also looking at the wider audience, right? Not so, you guys always represent society journals. So I don't know if this is necessarily shared by some of the big publishing houses. So I'm an editor for Wiley, and there it's actually seen as one of the first steps for the editor-in-chief. So so yeah, I think to just for this broad audience who not all might be submitting to LNO letters or the ESA journals, it might be worthwhile to inquire maybe with the editor-in-chief about the importance of the cover letter.
I was going to say that maybe we could not use cover letters. And when I sit on the other side of the desk, and we've been struggling with this paper for months with a student, and then she or he sends me an email with a cover letter to help them with a cover letter. Oh, no, more. I don't want to see this. Just write anything. Just say this paper is excellent. Please manage it. But anyway, I guess. And this has to do with the next question in the chat box. What are really important are the response letters to reviewers and editors. If the cover letter is not that important, the response letters are absolutely critical. We read them very carefully, and so do reviewers.
Yeah, so this is more about the post-submitting phase of the paper. So you have submitted your paper, and you may or may not have written a cover letter according to the journal you sent your paper to, and you're sent out for review, and then you need to respond to the criticism by the authors, by the reviewers. And then the question is by MD Mamoun. Maybe you want to ask the question yourself, I don't know. Otherwise I will read it up. How should we respond to reviewers? Some reviewers are too crazy. So, any of the panelists?
I would like to, can I say something about this? It's like, I have that feeling sometimes like, oh gosh, this person, why was like this? But I guess that at the end you want your paper to be published, and beside the tone that you might feel like the reviewer put, you have to try to address the main question or concern the reviewer have, and be very polite on answer everything with as much detail as you can. You cannot lead yourself, your energy to be bad because of the way the reviewer answered or review your paper.
You know, Facundo, I read you there because we have Latin blood. So when you get the reviews back, you want to kill the reviewer. And my suggestion to students is let it lie 24 hours, go and have a coffee, go for a walk, go for a swim in the lake, and then we discuss it tomorrow. Because today you're going to be really crazy and saying everything you didn't understand. And the other take is probably I didn't convey my message well. Maybe I wasn't clear enough. And if you take that attitude, it's very helpful, I think.
I think that's very insightful, and for us non-Latin people, this is, I still recognize this feeling, and putting it aside for 24 hours. So basically, I tell this to my students as well, you just pushed out a baby and someone is saying to you, it's kind of ugly, and that is just hurtful, right? Or it's lopsided, and so you just have to breathe through that process, and then try to think about what the point is of the reviewer. Nuria, you want to say something as well?
Yeah, I wanted to say that you have to try not to take it personally, because as a reviewer, when I'm especially picky with a manuscript, is because it's more interesting to me, or I'm, you know, so I'm more careful with that manuscript. So often when you get that reviewer that is like 10 pages, is a person that has put a lot of effort into it. And for me, the key word that Facundo said is to be polite. So even if you are emotional, thank the reviewer, you know, and you don't need to agree with what that person says, but you can say, always acknowledge that you understand what it means by the suggestion is doing. And that's a good way to start answering without being, you know, unpolite.
So Facundo, you have another addition to this?
No, sorry.
I'll just add one on top of what Nuria said. The politeness is critical, but as an editor, looking at the response to reviewers, we read those really carefully to see that the author understood the comment and then tried their best to address it. Or, and this was another question, if they disagreed, they had a really well thought out reason and argument for why they are not taking that suggestion. If I just see a series of, this didn't make sense, this is not relevant, we didn't make this change, nope, didn't do this either, then I know that, or I get the sense that the author was not taking the review seriously. And so at the same time, if there's something you disagree with, just be really clear about why and why you're not changing it. And those, so I look for well thought out responses. I don't care if half of them you disagreed with and said you didn't change. If they were well thought out, then you did a good job in your response.
Yeah, and I think there's a role for editors here as well, because sometimes if we talk about politeness, sometimes the reviewers are not polite. And that can be kind of hurtful, especially to early career stage researchers. So I think there's a role for editors here to come back to the reviewers that are too personal, or what is now also seen on Twitter, that you always recommend to someone with a somewhat non-English name, please ask a native speaker to edit your language. These comments can be kind of offensive. So I think there's a role, there's a responsibility for us editors to look carefully at that reviewers have some level of politeness and non-biasness as well. Kathy.
Made and that Kate and Robert are making in the chat, which is, if an inappropriate comment slips through to an author, send a note to the editor-in-chief so they're aware of it. Different journals have different structures, but I, as editor-in-chief, don't actually see every single letter that goes out from my editorial board members. And so if something slips through, I want to know about it. My subject matter editors are empowered to strike anything that's offensive from the reviews before it goes out. But please do reach out to the editors-in-chief.
Think there's some connection issues, Tobias, or not? Seems like it, yeah.
Yeah, apparently so.
Yeah. I also see that we're running beyond the hour. Facu or Pat, are there some pressing issues you still want to talk about with the audience, or are there some really pressing questions that still need to be asked?
No, Lisette, I want to just agree with what you said. I have received some very, very kind of rough review in the language, but the editor was so kind on translating those kind of aggressive review that I really appreciate the editor jobs on trying to try to be more polite on what the review says, and I finally was able to deal with the reviewer, but mostly based on what the editor did.
So I'm also conscious of you guys' time and also of the panelists' time. Is there any questions you guys feel that still need to be addressed from the pre submitted questions, or anything, last final thoughts you would like to share with this audience?
I'd just like to say a final word. Bear in mind, remember, we need to remember all the time that we are human beings, right? So editors make mistakes, reviewers make mistakes, authors make mistakes. And it's all about, doing better science and sharing what you've learned from your experiments, from your field study with a wider community. So this is the tiny bits of, editing, or, the methods, or, all the things we've been discussing are important, but the big picture is I want to share my experiment with the community.
Thank you. And thank you all for contributing your questions. I think there was a kind of an important question for especially early stage researchers. And especially in this day and age, where we see that people have less bandwidth due to COVID-19, and that people submit their papers and then look at very unreasonable acceptance turnaround times, I should say. So you say you submit a paper as an early stage researcher, and it takes like 1.5 years to come to a decision. Is there something, words of wisdom there from the panelists? And then I would like to close off the meeting after that. Yeah, so this is about reasonable turnaround times for early career stage research. I'll talk a bit about my own experience. We now have set up with freshwater biology, we have set up a special track for early stage researchers so that they get quicker responses, because we are we recognize that this is an issue. For instance, when you want to defend your PhD thesis, is this true for ESA journals as well, for LNO journals, that you have a special way of treating papers that are submitted by early stage researchers, and recognize that they have perhaps less time on their contracts and so on?
LNO journals didn't. I don't think we when I was there, we did not have that. Sorry, Juan, you guys have
No, I was going to say that we don't either, I think, and I think we should really be more careful.
Yeah.
I've had discussions with our staff members about the pros and cons of this. So Lisette, the fact that you figured out how to do it in a Wiley journal, I'm going to be talking to you offline, because the excuse was we couldn't. So I will be following up.
I don't know if we manage, but this is our intent, and there's a difference between whether we manage this as well. But but it's
I will follow up.
Yeah, and I also see that it's getting harder and harder to get reviewers, because with COVID-19, maybe reviewing papers is the first thing you let go of. And that causes huge delays, and especially for PhDs that are now finishing up their thesis, this is a real issue I think we as a community need to address.
That's an attitude we need to change as well. We are submitting, papers, and then we're declining to review, and that's not playing properly. And we get a lot of, I don't know, I imagine Kathy, you as well, but we get a lot of rejection from reviewers saying, oh, I mean, they always say no, this guy always says no, and he's publishing, 10 papers a year. Who reads them for him? So I think that's something we need to learn. Early career researchers should bear in mind. I mean, that's just part of the job.
Yeah, it's part of the job, but is there a reward system in place? That's all. That gets a bit philosophical, but
yes.
Yeah, so as an early stage researcher, is there a reward system in place for you to review a lot of papers? But that is maybe a different discussion altogether. I would like to thank all panelists. I think we had a lively discussion. I would like to thank the audience as well for raising these important questions. If you feel like the questions you asked either prior to this meeting or during this meeting has not been addressed properly or needs more context, I think most of the panelists have put their email out there. You can also contact us or the GSA and we can try to provide an answer for you. And with that, thank you all, and maybe a big round of applause for everybody. And for those people in Europe, have a nice evening. For those people in Asia, have a great start of your, have a great night. And for people in the Americas, have a lovely afternoon. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.